Today we are canning beef, and we're going to be canning chunks of beef. This is a roast that I bought, and then these here are just some steaks, and they were both on sale at the store. These are also some of those same steaks. I just haven't cut them up yet, and I'm going to be trimming some of this fat off. And the first thing we're going to do is just fill our canner to about 2 to 2.5 inches of cold water. And with this method, everything starts cold. So you want a cold canner, cold water, and we will put our rack in the bottom once we get the water to level because I want it to be as accurate as possible. And the great thing about cold canning is you can get everything put together ahead of time. So all of my jars can sit on the counter because they don't have to be warm. And you need to use canning salt if you want to salt your meat in the canning process, and for pints you use a half a teaspoon, and in quarts you can use a full teaspoon, or if you prefer you don't have to put any at all. I do like the flavor of the meat. I eat it right out of the jar sometimes, and that's because it has that little bit of salt in it. So I'm just going to get all these salted, and then I will have that step out of the way, and then we can move on to getting our meat all cut up and into pieces. Now first though, I wanted to show you, and this doing stuff on camera sometimes is tricky, but I just took a barbecue skewer and I am just marking the 1 inch, the 2 inch, and the 3 inch, and this is a really simple way to tell how much water is in your canner if you are concerned about getting the accurate amount. And when I put this in, we were at right about 2.5 inches, so that is perfect. And I'm just going to set my cold canner with cold water onto a cold unit on my cooktop, and it's just going to sit there until I am ready to start canning. And this is the All-American 921 canner, and it does not have a rubber seal where the lid meets the actual base of the canner. So you have to take olive oil, and I just put a little dab onto a paper towel, and I wipe the inside rim all the way around on the canner. And then I also take that same paper towel and I wipe the outer edge of the inside of the canner, and that is where the two edges meet, and that just gives it good lubrication so it doesn't get stuck together during the canning process. This is just a pamphlet. There's recipes and instructions in here. They are kind of pricey, but I do love mine. Now these, I got some rings out, and then today I'm going to be using the 4 jars canning lids. I have become a huge fan of these and use them all the time in canning. And with the new canning practices, they say that you do not have to wash or heat your lids. I do like to give them a quick rinse just to wash off any residue from the factory that might be there. So these are all rinsed and ready to go. My rings are ready to go. So now we will get the meat out and start trimming it. And now my daughter thinks this is just absolutely disgusting. She walked by while I was working on it and just grossed out because, you know, teenagers and the look of meat. But I am pretty fussy. I am a real texture girl, and I do not like fat per se. And so I just trim off as much fat as possible. Now there is fat marbling throughout the meat, and that does go through the canning process, and actually you will see towards the end of this video that it does solidify up on the top, and I can remove that as well once I'm ready to use it. But I just like to get, some people it doesn't bother, but like I say, for me, I just prefer to get as much fat out as possible so that when I go to use my product in a recipe, I don't have to deal with a whole bunch of fat in my jars. So this is, it was a pretty nice roast, and I was almost like, oh, I should have thrown this in the crock pot, but I really prefer to get stuff shelf stable. And I have found that when I can meat, especially like this, and like I say, because I feel like I'm just so sensitive, when I eat leftover steak or something that's been grilled, it almost gets a gamey flavor to me, and I don't find that to be true at all with the meat when I can it like this. So it's one of our favorite things to do. So as I am going along, I'm just going to kind of fill as I go. So I'm just going to cut some and get it put into the jars. And because they're in chunks, and they suggest not to go any bigger than 1 inch pieces, but I just kind of get as close as possible. But when I put them in here, you can see how much airspace is there, and I just kind of give it a light tap down. I'm not pushing down and squishing it. I'm just lightly tamping it down so that it removes as much air in there as possible and I can fit more product in. So I'm not going to bore you with the whole process of cutting it all up, but I'm just going to work on getting this sliced. And then these, because they were kind of long, I guess you would say, I cut them in half again, and then I cut them sideways into 1-inch cubes. And it does seem like a lot of work when you're doing this, standing there cutting and trimming and cutting and trimming. But let me tell you what, when you go to use this later on and you have it ready to go, it is such a blessing. And I can't tell you how many times I have forgotten to pull something out of the freezer, or I don't know what we're having for dinner, and I can just grab a jar of this or any other of the canned meats that I have and make a quick meal. So now that I have a whole bunch more chopped up, I am going to just start packing my jars again, tamping it down lightly, and then filling. And the 1-inch headspace does tend to be just the lower part of the ring that you can see there at the top. I have found that if I don't tamp it down lightly and I don't fill it to that 1 inch of headspace, or even just barely slightly above it actually, that when they come out of the canner, there's so much wasted space in the jar because it cooks down so much as it goes through the canning process. So I just tamp it down and get it kind of filled just a little bit overflowing of that 1 inch of headspace, and it seems to come out just perfect when I can. And that's what it looks like. And that I'm pointing to is just kind of where the 1 inch headspace normally falls when you use your measurer. So I'm going to get the rest of this put into my jars. And I had filled all of the jars that I had gotten ready, and that's the great thing about cold canning, is that you can just go grab a couple more and you don't have to worry about them not being warmed up. So because we did meat and there is fat on the meat, and I don't use any kind of a funnel because it's much easier to get them in the jars without it, the rims have gotten some debris and probably some fat on them as well. So you use vinegar, and I just put it on a paper towel, and I wipe the rims very carefully of all the jars. And after I've wiped them all once, I will turn around, grab another one, and do it one more time just for good measure. And then I'm going to take my I'm going to take my lids that I had pre-rinsed just to get any factory debris off. And I'm going to put one on the top of each jar. I used to be very OCD and wanted my lids to perfectly align with the front design or the name of the jar on the front. After years and years of doing this, I have quickly gotten over that, and I just put them on. And then we're going to take our rings and we're going to put them on finger tight. We're not reefing these down at all. We're just doing finger tight because we want the canner to be able to push any of the trapped air inside of that jar out before the canning process actually starts. So once I get all of my rings on, we are going to then take them and put them we're going to put the rack in first, and then we are going to put our jars in. And the nice thing about this is because everything is cold, I don't have to use a jar lifter, nothing's hot, you don't get burnt. It's real easy to just grab all the jars and get them stacked in here. And again, I can fit 7 on the base of my All-American canner, and then I will just put my spacer rack in, and then I will put the last remaining jars. I had 4 more. I didn't quite have a full canner today. And then I'm going to take my lid and I'm going to put it on. And with the All-American canner, it has this little like hook, and it slips underneath just like that. Kind of gives it an extra layer of protection. And then they say to have the lid as even as possible, so I just use the finger method and I go around opposite sides with my fingers and try to make sure that it is as even as possible. Once I'm happy with that, then I take the bolts and I lift them up and very lightly squeeze them down. I don't want to tighten them at this point, just enough to keep the spacing even all around the canner. And then after I've done that, then I will go back and I will give them a good reef down just to make sure they're good and tight. And at this point, I will turn my canner on. I don't turn it on high. I turn it to about 4 or 5, and I let that sit for probably 10 minutes before I turn it up to high. Now I'm just showing you, the first scene there was that there wasn't a steady stream of steam yet, and then this second scene there is. So now we have our timer set for 10 minutes to let it steam off. And you can see the pressure does go up a little bit, but it doesn't go up much more than this during the 10 minutes of allowing the steam. But my timer is rung, so now I'm going to put my weight on for where I am at. It's 10 pounds of pressure, so I have it on the 10 mark. And then as soon as it gets up to rattling like this, that's when you're going to start your timer. And for pints here, it is 75 minutes at 10 pounds of pressure. And then I'm going to adjust the temperature on my cooktop until I get it to where it's not just constantly rattling and rattling and rattling all the time. Now the 75 minutes are up, so I'm turning my canner off, or my stovetop off, and I'm going to let the pressure come down naturally. I'm not going to force it in any way. As you can see, it's back down to 0, so it is safe to now take the weight off. And I only take the weight off with a pot holder because it's hot. And I will let this sit for about a minute, and then after that I will unscrew the bolts, and then I will lift the lid away from me as I open it to let the steam out. But I'm not going to take the lid completely off because I want to slowly acclimate those jars from the heat inside. And after about 10 minutes, then I will take the lid off and let them sit for another 10 minutes to acclimate even more. And once they have done that, I then will take my jar lifter because they are still very hot, and I will get them all put out onto a towel. Now this towel is on top of a cooling rack, and you see just how much they're bubbling still. So we're just going to let these sit and cool off overnight, and generally about 24 hours, sometimes a little less. But see how the fat has solidified at the top of the jar? Now if you always store these in a cool location, when you go to open them and use them, it's really easy to take that fat layer off if you don't want that in your food. So now I'm going to remove the rings, and see that one is sealed and that one is not. You hear the difference? That one was kind of thunky. For some reason I had a non-seal lid, and I still need to check the rim of my jar to see if there was a nick. I didn't do that before I canned, which I should have. But I just put a little bit of dish soap on a paper towel, and I wash the rims. And I'm not like putting a whole lot of pressure here. I'm just using my fingernails to get around the grooves of the glass, just to clean off any grease or any debris that might be on the jars before I store them down in my pantry. So we'll get these all washed up, and we'll get them rinsed off. And then I will take a paper towel, and I will just dry the tops of the jars off. And I do this simply because we have hard water where we are at, and if I don't do this, sometimes it leaves little spots on top of the lid. Not that it really matters, but I just prefer to do that. And since I'm only using this paper towel to wipe water off, I'm very frugal, and I'll just put this paper towel back next to my sink, and I will use it to clean up a spill or for something else. But now that they are all dried on the top, I then take my Sharpie and I write what is on the jar, and then I write the date on there. And yes, I did have to go look at the calendar. I don't know why sometimes I just space out what day I canned things. But I'll get these all labeled up. I will show you what they look like. Aren't they pretty? And I use these in all kinds of things, and in a future video I am going to do one on different recipes that I make with some of the canned meat. So if you're interested in that, be sure you're subscribed. Thanks for hanging out with me today, and I will see you next time.